plants of textile industry and so on. And again, one can debate whether that's good or bad. Okay, so that's complex interdependency. To give my kids a task to develop a skill of complex interdependency, when they were little kids, when they go to bed, have a glass of water. Can you tell me a story, Daddy? So I used to play a game with them. And off the top of my head, I would think of two unrelated objects. And I'd say, okay, both of you think about how these two objects are connected. And in other words, I was forcing them to think interdependently. What's the relationship between a banana and a bicycle or whatever? And it would force them, it would develop the cognitive skills to try to push beyond what seemed apparent, how these things were different, to seeing how things were similar, or how things were connected. And you'll see, I'll share with you some exercises I do with my classes. So complex interdependency and globalism are higher orders of thinking that allow people to go beyond what seems to be apparent. And I'll mention in a moment the advantages of this. And lastly, I think a major objective of higher education is the development of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability, the reason I think critical thinking is important is we're all humans. And part of the human experiment is to see where we are and to try to improve upon it. So critical thinking is essential if we ever want to move our society forward. Critical thinking is not the tool of people who say, let us be happy with the status quo. Critical thinking is not the tool of people who shrug their shoulders and say, hey, nothing can ever change. Critical thinking is a tool of those people who want to perfect upon what we have. And I think it's essential to the viability of the human experiment. So my argument is higher education should develop skills, should develop knowledge bases. But of equal or greater importance, there are general ways of thinking about the world. Globalism, complex interdependency, and critical thinking. One of my favorite books when I was in college, if any of you remember, Neil Postman wrote a book, Teaching is a Subversive Activity. Why is teaching a subversive activity? Postman said good teaching is about getting students to think for themselves. That is subversive. And what he's really saying is it's about critical thinking, about getting... A few weeks ago, I brought in a guest speaker. Some of you might know Bill Ayers. And for 3 hours, Bill Ayers was essentially trying to say, hey, wait a second, don't sit on your hands. He didn't quote Postman, which amazed me, but he said, you have to be critical thinking. Think beyond the conveying common wisdom. So I think these are the goals of higher education. Now, what's the role of diversity? I will argue that diversity serves each and every one of these goals. So it's not only, here's the target population, Latinos or Polish immigrants or African Americans, but the very presence of having diversity in the classroom advances higher education for everyone in that classroom. And again, this is my attempt to reframe the issue of retention and diversity. There's some practical techniques to develop this in the classroom. And there's a logic. I happen to be Jewish, so I tend to think in decalogues, in tens. And I came up with 10 very fast exercises I'll share with you. But I structure them in a way that goes from appreciating the individual and the individual culture to creating a community in the classroom, and then the classroom reaching out to the broader community. And you'll see where I go with this. Half of my classes, I begin with the concept of a lens paradigm. We'll do a little brief exercise on this in a moment. Okay. A lens paradigm. The notion is that the way we look at the world is structured by preconceived notions. The paradigms we employ, the loose way of looking at the world, conservatives and liberals really do look at the world differently, don't they? We all operate under different paradigms. I use the term lens paradigm because it helps students think lens. We all wear different color lenses, so we see the world differently. This is very important. As we move toward an appreciation of globalism and complex interdependency and critical thinking. The premise behind what I do here is there's not one singular reality. Reality is filtered through the lens through which we look at that reality. So I do an exercise with students. I do it at the very beginning of the term, in part because it's an icebreaker. It also allows me to get a fix on from where the students are coming. And I first did this when I was in graduate school. I taught a class for Malcolm X, and the class was Contemporary International Issues. I swear to God, this is the title. Contemporary International Issues for Mature Adults. It was a senior citizens class. Back in the mid-70s, senior citizens had so the first day of class, I'm in my late 20s, I say, I guess by definition I'm an immature citizen. And I began with, explaining the idea that the way we look at foreign policy is filtered through the paradigm we use. And we all use different paradigms. We've all been socialized differently. And for my graduate school students, I'll use this as an excuse to explain independent and dependent variables. The way we look at the world is dependent upon different variables that have socialized us. And I'll ask them, what has socialized you? Say family, religion, race, so on and so forth. Well, with this class of adult citizens, mature citizens, I said, I think the paradigm you look through the world at is influenced by your first experience of that world. Your first experience of a world beyond your family. And these were people in their 70s, 80s. I had one woman in her 90s. I went around the class and I asked them to share their first memory of a world beyond her family. And one woman raised her hand and very excitedly she said, I remember seeing President Wilson speak at the National Guard Armory on Cottage Grove. And I got excited. President Wilson, this is before I found out that President Wilson belonged to the Ku Klux Klan and was a racist. He did some good things there, and not to apologize for him. But he was also a political scientist. Political science was a brand new field at Princeton University. And I said, what are your memories of President Wilson? I, as a graduate student, assumed she would recite, his appeal to the membership in the League of Nations or something. She said, knees. I said, what? And she said, knees. She said, I was a 7-year-old girl, and all I can remember is seeing a sea of knees in front of me. So again, I had to open up to her mind that this was her memory, of being a little kid. And that didn't even occur to me. One woman, and the classroom is a community. Jason Zingheim, and I know some of you were in his presentation, made this point too. If the classroom is a successful community, it is a learning community. And it's not you teaching the students. It's you all being teachers, you all being students. And this one woman raised her hand, and she remembered collecting peach pits during World War I. Does anybody know why they collected them? I never heard of this before, but it's true. They used to wear gas masks, and they used to grind up the peach pits to make the filters for the gas masks. So think if you're a kid, and you go to school, and you're being told to bring peach pits to school so they can grind up the filters so our soldiers overseas will not get burned lungs from mustard gas. It just creates a much different situation. You and I have not gone through this. We do not know about fighting a war on our own soil. And this gave me entry into her, her sensibility, how she would see foreign policy. So real fast, let's just do this. And usually I go around the class and I ask everybody, who has a first memory of a world beyond their family?
Lincoln, the Lincoln Memorial, and I was just so in awe of being there. And now, in retrospect, I've had to go back so many times for work-related